Well, thank you all for joining us this morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. We have people from around the globe. Um, and I'm Roger Thurrow, your trusty moderator for our session. After 3 decades as a reporter with the Wall Street Journal and a foreign correspondent for the Journal, I'm now a senior fellow in the Center for Global Food and Agriculture at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs and a newly minted scholar in residence at Auburn University's Hunger Solutions Institute. That's where I'm coming to you from at this moment. So you're in for a really great treat. You picked the right session, so congratulations for that. So for over the next hour, the next 70 minutes or so, we'll hear from two visionary leaders and thinkers about what we all can do to reimagine and reshape the global food system to both nourish the planet and preserve the planet. That's our greatest challenge and our overall task going forward in the coming decades. As we heard earlier from Jeffrey Saxon, he talked about the enormity of the challenge that faces us all. It's something that we can all be involved in. So a central principle of universities fighting world hunger from its very founding at Auburn University is that we all have a role to play. No matter our subject majors, our skill sets, our passions, we all have a role to play in conquering malnutrition and hunger. Individuals matter, universities matter. We all can make a difference. So our speakers today will challenge us to take up this task and inspire us to explore new frontiers in planetary health. First up will be Sarah Farley, who is the managing director of the Rockefeller Foundation's Food Initiative. She leads the foundation's global portfolio and is spearheading integrated operations for the food team. Sarah leads such signature initiatives as the Food Systems Vision Prize, which is really exciting and innovative and truly pioneering new frontiers, and also the Food Systems Summit as we also heard from Professor Sachs, will be coming up later this year at the United Nations. The Rockefeller Foundation has been at the vanguard of the planetary health movement for a number of years already. So unlike during the time of the Green Revolution, which the Rockefeller Center was a main supporter and backer of, when the emphasis was on agriculture production, the foundation is today leading the way on ensuring that our global food system is more nourishing, regenerative, so protective of our soils, water, climate, biodiversity, and health, and more equitable. So all these factors are so important. More equitable, with everybody sharing in the planet, in the bounty of our wonderful planet. So Sarah will tell us about some of the great innovations percolating at the Food Systems Prize and elsewhere at the Rockefeller Foundation. Sarah then will be followed by Montague Dement. Everyone calls him TAG, so we will too. Who is Professor Emeritus of Ecology at the University of California, Davis. At Davis, he directed the Global Livestock Collaborative Research Support Program that focused on research and capacity building in developing countries. He was instrumental in establishing the UC Davis Sustainable Agriculture Program and also the Century Experiment, investigating the long-term impact of agriculture systems on the environment. So later, TAG, this is where I got to meet him, was Vice President for International Programs at the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, where he led advocacy for higher education support for developing countries, became a source at times for my writing and my books. So thanks for that, TAG, and your wonderful colleagues at the APLU. So TAG will tell us about what universities can do and are doing to improve food security for all of us. So we're hoping and planning that there'll be time for questions following each speaker. So please put your questions in the chat box or the question forum. So let's get started. So Sarah, you're leading off today, so over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roger. It is always such a pleasure to speak with universities. Students are the future of food systems transformation. And so there's just no better audience to connect with around these important messages. And I'm just delighted to spend the time with old friend Tag and a new friend Roger and with all of you today. So first, I want you all to think about any movie you've seen set in the future. What did that future look like? Was it bountiful and abundant, a world of fresh food for all, affordable, accessible, nutritious, where society is united and thriving culturally? Probably not. almost 99% of books and movies set in the future are dark. They are dystopian nightmares. Here we have an image from Blade Runner, but think Hunger Games, Mad Max, Handmaid's Tale, the list goes on and on and on. In fact, we had colleagues at the Omidyar network do an actual analysis on this very question to try to quantify all the books and movies set in the future, optimistic, pessimistic, and they were the ones that found it's almost none that are optimistic. And why is that a problem? Well, it's a problem because for any transformation we want in the world, it really is two acts. Yes, it's the act of creating the innovation, the transformation, but the first act is the act in our minds. It's the act of imagination. And so as a society, we have become really good imagining the world we don't want to live in, and we don't have a lot to say or see in terms of the world we do want to inhabit. So that is the genesis story behind an initiative the Rockefeller Foundation launched a year and a half ago called the Food System Vision Prize. And I'm here to tell you about it. Essentially, the Food System Vision Prize was a way to try to shift the narrative on food systems from dystopian to optimistic, from a depiction of humanity barely surviving to one of humanity thriving and the planet thriving along with us. It's a picture that is no longer about incremental, specific solutions, so often technological, to truly transformational solutions that take in cultural shifts, economic shifts, environmental shifts, all these shifts together. And the idea of the prize was really predicated on this belief that inside of the minds and the hearts of young people, of farmers, of entrepreneurs, of innovators, of every stripe, of eaters, because no matter whether you're a food system policymaker or a food engineer, even if you're none of those things, we're all eaters. We're actually all stakeholders in the food system. It's an idea to take that creativity and give people an offer to say, you can all be protagonists in your own future. The future doesn't need to be written for you. You can author it. So what is the promise of a vision? If we think about unleashing a movement where different people and groups around the world put forward their vision, what do we think will actually come of that? Well, at Rockefeller, we had 4 hypotheses. The first is we think it will unleash inspiration. Now, we had that as a hypothesis 6 months before COVID. And then what happened beginning in March, April, May of last year? We saw miles long lines at food banks. We saw farmers plowing under their crops. We saw farmers dumping milk. We saw the fragility and the inadequacy of our supply chains and the broken places, many broken places in our food systems. And that was a moment that in one way wasn't shocking, but it begged for the need for hope. What is the blueprint? If this isn't working, what do we need? So the world we knew needed inspiration, but my goodness, they needed it even more in light of COVID. But we also need more knowledge. You know, the shift toward talking about food systems and less just about value chains and more linear depictions of food is one that I welcome. I've studied and worked on systems for the last 20 years. So but we're still very incomplete in terms of understanding the full complexity of food systems. So we just need to better understand them, and we need to better understand the variation. What are the food systems constraints, the barriers and the enablers in the Davis food system versus California versus the West Coast versus North America? These are all systems at different scales. We also felt that there's a need for a global network that is really advocating for food systems transformation and advocating for visions for food systems. So that was another hypothesis, that with something like a Food System Vision Prize, you could pull out a new network that could be democratized and open and really vibrant. And the last was innovations. We do believe there is a need for new ideas, for new solutions, and what an interesting way to go about finding those. So this whole enterprise was really to try to enable a new North Star for our various efforts to try to make our food systems not just more nourishing, because we know right now the #1 cause of death globally is non-communicable diet-related disease, but so too to see food systems that are both nourishing and regenerative, as well as equitable. And so this prize is really just a first step toward creating that more hopeful future. So we had all this, like philosophically, we felt good about it. We had a bunch of partners, but we thought, okay, this is a hard endeavor. It's very hard to think in futures. It's very hard to think about what is 2050. How will we move around? What will we eat? What will housing be like? What will the energy infrastructure be like? To really put yourself in the future is a rather unnatural act. So we wanted to create some guideposts to help people do this. So the first was we put forward these 6 themes because we did not want this to be a prize where people would say, I've got it. It's all about soil health specifically and only. And here are all the things, all the technologies we should think about, all the environmental consequences. No, one had to interlace a story of, yes, the environment and technology, but so too diet, economics, culture, and policy. And so this is a very complex system story, the system of today and the system of tomorrow for your place. And we didn't define place. It could be a country, it could be a city, it could be a biome of some type. Anybody could define it. There were these complicated judging criteria that the vision needed to be systems oriented. It needed to be community informed and co-created. It couldn't just be your idea sitting in a university. You need to go out with the community to build this vision. And we're asking for all this in the middle of COVID with quarantine and lockdowns all around the world. And importantly, this wasn't about utopia. Visions of utopia are inspiring, but they don't give us a blueprint. One also had to put forward a vision that is feasible, meaning the 170 judges we had in evaluating these could actually see a plausible pathway between where we are today and advances in science, technology, and innovation that could make, however wild the ideas sound, actually seemingly plausible. So we put this thing together with some fantastic partners, IDEO, Second Muse, and an array of strategic network partners like EAT, like FOLU, like Award in Africa, Food Tank, and others. And then we crossed our fingers. We thought, we'll get a few dozen, maybe we'll get 100 visions. We got 1,300 submissions from 4,000 organizations in 119 countries. You can see 148 million press impressions. This was a sort of spectacularly humbling response because it suggests that people everywhere yearn to be asked this question: what is the future to which you aspire for food systems? And most spectacularly, this volume of data that came in, one, it's open to all of you. You can all check out all 1,300 visions still today. They're all live on the IDEO platform. I can give you the URL for this. But what I want to share for the rest of the presentation is, what did we learn? What do those visions tell us about the challenges of our food systems today, the solutions we should be looking for, and the aspirations we can hold in our hearts and our minds as we all work through the challenge of change? So with this, to give you a sense of geography, we have the 1,300 submissions. We then took those down to 76 semifinalists. This map shows you the 76 semifinalists. You can see sort of really geographically diverse. In fact, we had more submissions from the African continent than we did from North America, which is so awesome to see. These are the 10. These are the 10 that we came to, the top 10. So we had 2 indigenous communities, one on the Rosebud Indian Reservation in South Dakota, one in Canada, 2 teams in India, one that really takes a continent or a countrywide approach, which is the Eat Right team, another Arakunomics, which looks at 3 specific geographies. Fabulous team in Nigeria, one in Kenya, Stone Barns in New York. Really interesting team in China looking to shift to a more plant-based diet for the whole of the population. Really exciting team out of Wageningen in the Netherlands and one in Lima, Peru. So with all of that as context, let's talk about the challenges. So I would think for the researchers and the students listening, this list of challenges is probably not shocking to you in terms of what are the food systems challenges for which we need transformation. What was interesting, though, is because of the size of this data set, we were able to work with our in-house data science team at the Rockefeller Foundation and actually look at mentions of specific challenges and plot them by geography. So sharing with you this visual, Look at this. We've got North America, climate change and poverty tie as the top challenge mentioned as the reason for food systems transformation. Whereas if you look down to South America, you can see that it's disease and poor health, obesity and climate change tie as your top challenges. Over in Africa, it's demographic change, malnutrition, and still climate change. Just a little bit at the top. But just this texture, this variation, Oceania, far out in front is climate change, gives you a sense that, I think it gives a sensitivity that when we talk about the need for food systems transformation, the challenges are place-based and that there are these broad global themes, but they manifest really differently in different places with different people with different cultures. So now let's talk about solutions. So what we were able to do with the data set is essentially take the 1,300 submissions and code them according to all the solutions within the 6 themes that were mentioned. And we bucketed them into 4 categories. One we called the tidal waves. These are solutions that are just showing up in so many of the visions that there's really kind of widespread consensus that if you're serious about food systems change, this needs to be showing up. Then there is a second category you could call the high watermark. So this is where you're seeing pretty strong convergence. So 50 to 99 visions mention these explicitly. A third bucket is the cresting waves. So you're starting to get growing confidence behind these visions. And then there's the kind of early signals of innovation, which we call the small ripples. So I want to walk you through those. So for tidal waves, just a few, and these lists are actually very, very, very long. So these really are just examples. But and to me, these are very validating because these are things that sometimes feel are a little bit fringe, but they're not. Promoting soil health is actually gaining a ton of global traction. So too, incentivizing behavior change for better diets and scaling up food and agriculture education, go universities. The second in these high water marks, we're seeing things like promoting agroforestry, deploying smart sensor innovations, promoting and preserving traditional knowledge, values, and indigenous practices. On the cresting waves, a few here are like promoting pollinator health, advancing the Internet of Things, and changing subsidies from those staple crops that are so very much behind the rising incidence in NCDs to shifting to regenerative agriculture and to healthy foods. And the last, the small ripples, this was one I thought was so interesting. It was the idea of repurposing soon to be outdated infrastructure for food systems. So this was actually a team in the United States, and they were saying, if we're actually shifting the automobile fleet from petroleum to electric, what are we going to do with gas stations? What if gas stations became food hubs? And you had this, quite quickly, tens, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of food hubs globally because you're using the infrastructure of gas stations. Developing and advancing 3D printed food, changing public food procurement policies. I actually think this is showing up even more than a small ripple, but we're talking about procurement such as the institutional procurement for food. These are massive procurement dollars. And if you can change the subsidy arrangements and the sort of government funding pipelines to incentivize that those dollars be spent on healthy food grown in nourishing and regenerative ways for the planet, that is a massive supply signal that you can send out through supply chains. Another really neat thing that came out of this Food System Vision Prize was this idea of tensions, because by having 1,300 different large food system visions, you could kind of see how certain ideas really do offer a juxtaposition. And so the first I want to speak to is around pricing and kind of the impact imperative behind food system visions. They kind of fell into 3 buckets. One was these food system visions at their heart should be about producers and about advancing farmer livelihoods. Seemingly in tension with that was another very large population of visions that are really about affordability. At the very least, we need to make sure that the most nutritious foods are no longer requiring large percentages of households' wealth, as they do in the least developing countries, but can be attained with very little outpouring of household resources. And a third bucket is looking at true cost, wherein we're talking about how to take what are currently exogenous variables, be that biodiversity loss, greenhouse gas emissions, health costs, the rising case of NCDs, and internalize those costs into what you pay for a hamburger. And so these three, they don't necessarily need to be at odds, but in some ways they did offer three different ways to view the future. Another tension is urban versus rural. A large proportion of these visions are really around trying to reimagine urban spaces as the epicenter of food systems, whereas a whole other proportion were really about revitalizing rural livelihoods, valorizing what it means to return to farming. And I think this is a tension as well. And a third is around meat and meat production. You had a lot of visions that were trying to just reimagine the livestock value chain, poultry value chain, aquaculture, et cetera, to optimize for certain environmental and health impacts, and other visions that were really trying to transition away from meat. So where I want to take you in the final moments of this presentation is toward 5 aspirations. So looking across the real heart of these visions, what we were able to distill is 5 aspirations for 2050. Essentially, if we can deploy these visions, if we can get the movements behind them, this is what we can anticipate from the future. So I don't want you to hear my voice as I say this. I want you to hear the voices of 4,000 organizations that represent hundreds of thousands, millions of people actually behind me. So the first, food is community. In the future, when we eat, we will strengthen our connections with our loved ones, our friends, our neighbors, our places, our shared history, and those who help bring our food from farm to plate. And there's a lot of solutions at work that can help us do this, from developing and supporting community-owned food systems assets to protecting, sharing, and creating recipes. Second, food as the new economy. In the future, we can be confident that the exchange of goods and services related to food, it adds value and it contributes to sustainable and equitable new economies. Solutions here include creating job creation schemes that advance new types of work to making healthy food affordable and accessible. Third, food as reconciliation. In the future, our food systems, the choices we make within them, they can help us heal the wounds of the past. And this is about promoting and preserving traditional knowledge gained through indigenous practices, but it's also about advocating for human rights and social justice and food sovereignty. Fourth, food is medicine. So in the future, when we eat, we can do so consuming foods that are healthy for our bodies, our minds, our communities, and those are foods that are going to be affordable and they're going to be accessible and they'll be desirable for everyone. So solutions here around incentives for behavior change for better diets, creating personalized nutrition programs, and others. And last, food is resilience. So in the future, our production practices and consumer demands are going to shift to become nature positive, operating under planetary boundaries. And this is around solutions such as, just using land more sustainably, water management, improving environmental protection policies, circular economy, etc. So in all of this, I feel that the 1,300 food system visions, they issue an invitation to everyone listening and beyond, and they ask us questions. What future do you stand for? You listening right now, what future do you seek? And what future do you choose? We all have a role to play. And what is so exciting about this moment today, being able to give this speech to you, is that we have a moment to issue a really exciting invitation to all of you to get involved in everything I've just said. Roger mentioned the UN Food System Summit. This is a big deal. There have been a lot of UN summits on food. There has never been a UN Food System Summit. And I can tell you, all the big organizations globally that are thinking about and working on food are trying to find a way to be heard. And so what was just launched 48 hours ago, so you guys are getting in right on the ground floor, is something called a Food Systems Game Changers Lab. And here's the URL. I really encourage you to go check this out. But essentially what this is, it's an open platform to invite you to submit your solution for food system transformation. What'll happen if you're selected, and the selection happens in the end of May, you're going to be placed in a cohort of people who are really excited, interested, and able to move on a solution like you. So let's say you're working on a solution that relates to how we might democratize precision agriculture. You'll be placed in a cohort of other people in different ways working on democratizing precision agriculture. As a cohort, you're going to get facilitators, mentors, live sessions, resources, master classes. And as a cohort, you're going to develop an action agenda that is put forward at the UN Food Systems Summit for potential matchmaking with investors, with national governments, with city governments, and with other kinds of funders and businesses. So this is a really exciting thing. And what's very cool is the virtual platform on which it is occurring is actually that of Thought for Food, which you may know of as the world's largest Gen Z, Gen Y agri-food innovation hub. So I think you'll find a lot of reasons to get excited about this. And so with that, thank you so much. Excited to hear your questions and join in a conversation together.
Hey, thank you very much, Sarah. Wow. Thanks for bringing the energy and the inspiration. And then also the with the Game Changers lab, that really sounds exciting. And this invitation, everybody watching today and students all over the world to get involved. So one question I had is, what's the timetable for the current vision proposals and projects that you have? When might we see them in fruition, and actually that we can go visit them and say, wow, look what this vision has led to?
Love the question. So they have been chosen as the top 10 visionaries, and I'll pop in after the questions, I'll pop in a URL to a preliminary impact report that we also just produced last week. So you can already get a sense of what are these teams doing? What have they been up to? And then to track their progress over the year, we're going to do an event about them, with them, at the UN Food Systems Summit, where people can come and see what are their needs, where are they going. We're also working with a Hollywood film company that is going to go around the world and shoot a series of documentaries about these 10 food systems. And we hope to premiere that in a first ever Food Systems Film Festival, which we are organizing together with FAO and the World Food Forum, which will be happening in October. So that'll be a really neat way. And I will say as well, there is going to be a whole piece of that, which is about inviting youth to submit films. So I'll make sure that information gets back to TAG and you, Roger, so you can blast that to the university's Fighting Hunger community, because it'll just be a really neat way for students and people under 40 to connect around film as film and video games, actually, as a neat way to talk about food systems.
Yeah, no, that's great. And particularly the film, the photography, and how that it's so visceral to people to see that. I was also asking selfishly for myself, as one who deals with words and the books, that perhaps in my next book writing venture, also to perhaps chronicle some of the visions as they come to form.
Amazing.
As well. So I talked to Raj about that at some stage, and so we'll continue the 3 books that I've done. I call the Real Hunger Games trilogy. So it's not about some dystopian world, but it's these challenges in front of us today that you described in conquering hunger and malnutrition. So thanks for dispelling. Yeah, here's a dystopian gloom that's out there, but these are real world problems that we're dealing with, and it's not science fiction. This is real time. It's the nonfiction that's in front of us. So we have one question that's also come in. It's being asked, how realistic is the idea of 3D printed food? Is that something that's actually being researched? And is it soon on the horizon?
Yeah, there are groups, and actually one of my colleagues here at the foundation, that's really his specialty, is kind of getting into these alternative foods, alternative protein spaces. So there is research going into this. It's still rather preliminary, but cellular meat, fermented foods, preservation, this is going to happen, and I think it's a pretty exciting area for innovation.
Alicia, are we seeing any other questions that aren't coming up in the chat?
No, I'm moving all questions from Huva into the chat. One question we did get, and I was ferociously typing the response, but I
Oh,
can
good.
speak it here, by Jada Nelson is there a way to get a copy of this presentation? And yes, the presentations will be made available immediately following the conference.
Hey, Sarah, I was also wondering, so, kind of the 10 finalists or the 10 that you had focused on.
Yeah.
So of all the other visions, the 1,300 plus, are they still being worked on? Are people following through with them? So it's not just something that they said, oh, here's this competition, here's this great innovative program that the Rockefeller Foundation is running. Are they following through with this? Do you see the enthusiasm that, okay, this is something that I have in my mind, I'm continuing to follow up on these?
It's hard to know with specificity at the level of their 1,300, but we are in touch with them. They're part of a community, 8,000 person strong community. And so one of the ways we're going to have a kind of better understanding of that is we're working to build this food systems network. And that's something that is going to be unveiled here in the next few months. So I won't say too much about it, but just to say that we hope by having a space where these other visionaries that weren't selected as top 10 can really come in and work with each other, find peer mentors, etc., we'll be able to get clear signaling as to how that advance is going. It's hard. This is hard work. And another observation we've had is that there is a skill set, a unique skill set to be a systems leader. In fact, I was part of a team that led some research on systems leadership specifically, because it's a flavor of leadership that's different from certainly authoritarian leadership or other forms where there's a lot of humility to it. You realize that you have almost no control over system change. And that's true if you're Rockefeller. It's true if you're the World Bank. You have the littlest bit of control. There's so many dependencies. They're non-linear, meaning if I do X, I'm not certain Y will happen because there's a secondary effect and a tertiary effect. And so we really need to be intentional about cultivating this new type of leadership. And so we're actually going to be starting a fellowship, a food systems fellowship, and that'll be a global fellowship. Would love to send that out to your community as well. That'll launch here in the next few months. But we think it's just so important that food systems leaders are supported in learning these new skills and this new orientation to collective change, which sort of defies not only a lot of the linear thinking, but a lot of the kind of classic business logic.
Excellent.
Sarah, this Tag. Can I?
Yeah.
Hey, Tag.
Yeah. No, I think that's a critical point. I mean, it's not just leadership, but it's also from a science point of view, it's having scientists who know how to not only work within their discipline, but connect within a teamwork and I will talk a little bit about this, but I think it's a very different ball game for, say, university scientists, for the most part, in this transformation from very focused disciplinary problems to the system level. And that is part of what needs to be transformed with faculty, but it also needs to be a transformation in the educational process of both undergraduates and graduate students.
Yes, yeah. I'll drop a resource into the chat to support maybe a little bit further discussion, but here you go. There's a brief on systems leadership. It sort of defines this and gives some really neat case studies of organizations and initiatives that have embraced it. But to your point, Tag, I think it's a bit of an unnatural act. It's not how our institutions incentivize behavior. Publish or perish, right?
Don't take all my talk away here.
Let's pass the mic to you, Tag.
Yeah, we'll move on to Tag. You guys are really adroit at dropping stuff and links and things into this. I need this adroitness and this flexibility, this nimbleness to do that. Just wanted finally, Sarah, and I think you were alluding to this. Rob Catlett is put a question in on an observation about how do we keep the momentum going and finding and in terms of encouraging this to keep going. So I'm assuming this isn't going to be, it's not just a static kind of one point in time, but it's going to move. It's going to move with time. It's going to move with place, with space, and these adjustments that we didn't perhaps seen, we haven't seen so much with kind of the green revolution as you know, systems kind of went in place and ossified, and so they've been there, and we see the impacts now. These are going to roll with the time, right? And say, hey, we need to we need new visions that are coming and say, oops, we miscalculated on that. We need to do something. We need to be nimble on this.
That's right. And, you know, I'll put another link in the chat for the web pages for each of these teams. These teams want to hear from you. If you're a researcher that is doing something on, you know, plant-based foods, be in touch with a team in China. They're amazing. They want to connect with researchers. They have the ear of government. These teams understand that transformation is a team sport, so they are so eager to be connected to. So I will make it clear how you can reach out to them.
Excellent, thanks. Okay, Tag, your slides are up. Over to you. Take it away.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And actually, it's interesting, without actual planning, that Sarah and my talks are somewhat intersect. And I'm going to talk about what universities can do to solve food insecurity, but I'm really going to focus on one particular element. And that element comes from, I hate to say it, but 50 years of working in developing countries. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Ethiopia back when Haile Selassie was an emperor. And I have been active in sub-Saharan Africa in particular for all those years. And I mean, Sarah has produced a very interesting, what should I say, process by which we can get to food security. But I have to say that one of the fundamental requirements to make all the very interesting technologies and knowledge and policy that's going to be necessary for food security is only going to happen when we have people in developing countries who are well educated, have a vision of how to solve the problems, have the capacity to do so, and can produce the policies and the innovation and the entrepreneurship that's necessary to make all of this happen. So I'm going to place a lot of emphasis on human capital development. Okay. So let's talk about the role of universities, because universities are very, very important in building human capital. But they're also, in the process of building human capital, they create and extend knowledge. And they do so particularly in the United States. And through our public universities, we have engaged with society to solve problems. And I think solving problems, keep this in the back of your mind, and I'll go back to it, but solving problems or addressing, in today's vernacular, challenges. So let's think of problems as more specific things, challenges as the big picture things. Those are critical in driving what we want at the systems level. And keep that in mind. So what is human capital development? Well, first of all, people are, at least in my view of development, are critical to the any kind of functional society. They're the ones who create the policies. They are the ones who take the leadership. And so it's the aggregate of human capital that ends up being the basis for national development. And we see this in the quality of life. And in particular, one of the striking examples of this is that if you look at work done in Latin America by researchers from Emory University years ago that followed the outcome of health interventions and nutritional interventions early in life, it had a lifetime impact on salaries, on their quality of their life, in their achievements, followed over a 40-year period. So if you aggregate that, what you find is that you get a society that has a higher level of performance. There are very few countries that have gone through the process of going from low income to medium income to higher income that have not invested heavily in their education systems. The other thing you find is that nutritional status, we did a lot of work on the quality of diets of children in Africa. And we found that when they had a good diet, a diet that was rich in micronutrients, it increased their IQ scores, it increased their learning, their performance in school, it even increased their leadership behavior in playground activities. So nutrition, early in life, education, all of that ends up being part of what creates a lot of human capital and, frankly, the potential for development. Well, okay, there we are. So let's look at our higher education system as a driver of national development and development in low-income countries. But first with us, one of the most significant acts ever passed by Congress was the Morrill Act in 1862. And that, during the Civil War, provided resources, land resources for each state to create colleges, and I quote this from the bill, without excluding other scientific and classical studies and including military tactics, to teach such branches of learning as are related to agriculture and the mechanical arts. So each state created a public institution that would provide higher education for the general public. And at this time, only the very wealthiest went to the private universities of the United States, the Harvards, the Yales, the Princeton. Most of the population had no access to higher education. And so this was a remarkable step in our history, because it then provided for each state to have colleges, which later became universities, the Michigan states, the Ohio states, even Cornell is a land grant, MIT is a land grant. These were institutions that were then available to the general public. The other major factor in higher education was post-World War II, the GI Bill. And this GI Bill provided for veterans who came back from World War II financial assistance to go to the university, and was probably one, not all, but one of the major reasons why the US had such a dramatic economic expansion in the post-World War II period. And note, though, however, it was something that was really focused on only on white males. And while that was what should I say? It was a very effective bill, but it was a restrictive bill in a sense as well. We have now 14.5 million students in public universities in the United States. Is a huge population of our people. And it frankly has been a critical driver of the US economic growth post-World War II. So what was the US public universities' role in international development? Well, primarily through USAID, but also through support from, frankly, from the Rockefeller Foundation. US universities actually were fundamental in developing higher education institutions in developing countries, particularly in agriculture. And if you talk to people who have been around in the development community and had worked in USAID, they say that this is perhaps one of USAID's most impactful efforts in its portfolio, in its historical portfolio. And it was, in fact, part of the Green Revolution. Norman Borlaug was not only a scientist, he worked with the CGIAR, which then was CIMMYT, and support from Rockefeller, and in conjunction with a number of US universities, they produced the short-statured rice and other cereals, which was the foundation of that revolution. But Borlaug was more than a scientist. He was an advocate. He understood the value of human capacity. He was a real advocate for the development and support of the institution building in India and Pakistan, which was done in conjunction and through US land-grant universities. Furthermore, USAID at the time provided literally tens of thousands of students from low-income countries with usually graduate education in the United States, particularly focused on agriculture. And this built a whole cohort of scientists who, during the 20th century, were frankly the pillars of development in many of the countries that were targeted. So understand that building human capacity, building these institutions provides a constant flow then of people capable of dealing with the issues of food and nutritional security. And it has not been, unfortunately, USAID has not continued this investment in higher education. Many of its investments, particularly in people have retired. So it's something that we want to continue to push for because we need those kinds of people in places of importance in developing countries to support the kinds of activities, for example, that Sarah has outlined that Rockefeller is doing and which USAID is doing. But as we all know, the 20th century was a place that was quite different from the world we now have. And a lot of the problems were narrowly focused. They were disciplinary scientists. They were about a nutritional deficiency that affected infants. They were about a crop disease that affected cereals. It was about fertilizer requirements. These were fairly narrow, what I would call problems. But the world is filling up. There's almost 3 times as many people today in the world as there were when I was in high school. And that's a huge pressure on the planet. And it means that the kinds of problems that we have are problems that involve interaction between people as much as the problems of actually focusing on some disciplinary problem. And as Sarah has stated so well, these are hugely complex problems. They're what we call wicked problems. They are hard to solve. They're not easily addressed through experimental design, but they're often attacked through a focus at the systems level. So a while back, a couple of years ago, actually, Sarah was involved in this with us and started us off on our strategy. We brought together a commission supported by Kellogg of 300 plus individuals and organizations from the public and the private sector. We developed working groups. We spent a considerable amount of time addressing what were the challenges to food and nutritional security that universities could tackle. And we also looked at how universities had to better organize themselves to mobilize those resources. I must give a Credit to Dr. Samantha Alvis, who was at APLU at the time, who's now at USAID. She led the report writing, and the report, which I suggest you take a look at, it's very detailed, is available as a download, and you can find it on the APLU website under Challenge of Change. So challenges for universities. Well, what is the great strength of the universities? Well, universities are one of the few places where all the relevant disciplines required for many of these complex problems exist within a single institution. And the strength we have in university research, both public and private in the United States, is remarkable. And the question is, how do we harness that better? The weakness is that we have what I call horizontal problems in a vertical world. We have universities which are primarily structured along disciplinary lines, the Department of Economics, the environmental sciences, the microbiology, the agronomy, etc. And so resources flow down those lines. Faculty appointments, promotions, support for facilities are all vertically oriented in the university. One might call them silos. So how do we cross these disciplinary boundaries and do transdisciplinary research on wicked problems? And how to ensure education that allows strong disciplinary training, but also builds the skills to be part of an interdisciplinary team. The institutional response. Well, development of institutions within universities with problem focus. And I think this problem focus is really important. We use this in the Global Livestock Collaborative Research Support Program, which was funded by USAID, which looked at the issues around people who depend on livestock for their livelihoods in developing countries. And the way to get integration was to put out a problem, to define a problem in some degree of description so that people could apply for that RFA, but they had to focus on the problem, and their progress was evaluated on their ability to be making progress towards that problem. It forced people to look at the interactions between disciplines in order to solve something of complexity. This is very similar to, the grand challenges, the prize that Sarah was discussing. This has become something of a way to bring together interaction between disciplines. Grand challenge approach, a number of universities, UCLA, University of Minnesota, have put out grand challenges. They have taken resources, put those resources in a position where they could approach a major problem, and the funding would flow not through departmental lines, but to the team. And this is I think, a very important transition that needs to be made. It is not an easy transition to make, but it certainly is one that is changing the focus of faculty. And faculty in universities are very powerful, and they have a great deal of freedom. And in many ways, we need to think creatively about how to bring them together around problems of the nature that we're discussing. Changes in the incentive structure within institutions. Faculty are very sensitive to incentive structures, as are all human beings. And we need to do this in a way that gets the merit and promotion system in line with the ability to solve problems, to to be at least as responsive to interdisciplinary research, which is a team-oriented process, as it is to individual scientists working on a more narrow focus. And then we need to create educational processes that provide disciplinary excellence and build collaborative skills across disciplines. There is no substitute for disciplinary excellence. And that we don't want to dilute that, but we also want to create collaborative skills to work as a team, to understand how a disciplinary structure or focus interact with other aspects of things that are very important to the discipline that they're pursuing. And this is critical for students. Sometimes it's referred to as a T educational structure. The T, top of the T is the cross-cutting capability, and the base of the T is the depth within a discipline. And this is really, I think, something that students should be looking at themselves, and to a certain extent, they have, many of the students in recent years that I have interacted with are bringing this to the table and need to be able to be supported by their educational process, particularly at the graduate level. So public universities' role in global food and nutritional security. We need to invest in university systems in developing countries. These are the people that come out of these systems are the ones who lead, who create, who establish the policies, who govern, who are the entrepreneurs. These are the people who make their society functional and stable and resilient. These are the vast number of people who populate the positions within a developing country. If you go to Kenya, you go to Ethiopia, two countries I'm very familiar with, most of the people, 98% of the people in government, 98% of the people who are teaching in universities, 98% of the people who are entrepreneurs are people who were educated in the universities in Nairobi or in Addis Ababa. A few have been educated outside, but the vast majority of people who make the society function are the types of people who make the policies that will bring us food security, who support the innovations that we all are looking for, will be people who are educated in the national universities. And this is a long-term investment. And that's one of the things that's hard about this, that it is long-term. It's not flashy, but it is absolutely essential. And I would say that we often talk about resilience, and a resilient society is one in which people are educated, where they have opportunities, they understand how to make change, they understand how to adapt, they have the tools to do so. And so education, an educated society is a resilient society. So the future, if we want a livable world, a more equal world, then investment in higher education systems is essential both for the US and developing countries. That is, education is a way for upward mobility, and upward mobility is essential for removing inequality. And inequality is probably one of the major factors affecting food security globally. So thank you very much, and look forward to further discussions.
Thank you so much, Tag, for that, for this both poignant and inspirational message, and this history lesson that we get along the way. So thank you very much for that. So
with age.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's what I'm finding too, right? Our knowledge expands. We become better historians than.
Yes.
So we have a question from Ermias that is asking, could you give us some examples of innovations that have been produced over the years through US and host country cooperation that has produced an impact for low-income countries?
Well, I would say that the entire, if you look at the agricultural university system in India, it is almost entirely a result of a long-term collaboration with about 10 US land-grant institutions. And India has moved very dramatically in terms of overall food production. In large part, that the follow-up to the Green Revolution and the spread of the Green Revolution was largely due to that university system. So that's one. I would say that one of the most important nutritional things that I can think of is the work that, and I don't mean to honk our own horn here, but we did this work looking at meat consumption in children in Kenya and Ghana. And what we found was that meat, a small amount of meat, for children who were micronutrient deficient, in general, many children, I mean, 65% of the population in rural Kenya is micronutrient deficient, particularly zinc and iron. And zinc and iron are very bioavailable in meats. And so providing these individuals with a small amount of meat on a daily basis, we did this in a controlled study of over 1,000 kids in rural Kenya. Their IQ scores increased by about 15%. They're grade and a half better in school. They showed, as I was saying, they showed greater leadership behavior and playground activities. The teachers complained that the kids were, too energetic, actually. They were more used to the kids who were more just, kind of in a morbid state, and frankly. I mean, and then we followed this up with a study on how to get diets into how to get meat into the diets of children. And we did this work in Ghana. And one of the people who was our partner there was Anna Larty, who then went on to be director of nutrition at FAO. What we did was we formed women's groups, and we did an experiment where we looked at different kinds of interventions with the women, income generating activities and microfinancing loans. Well, it turned out that women were terrific. As soon as they knew the impact of this on their children, they were very enthusiastic. It was so profitable, the rural banks took it over. And one of the ways we extended this knowledge was we formed a relationship with a very high quality Nollywood filmmaker. Now, Nollywood is watched all over Africa on CDs. And it's the Nigerian film industry. And he made, with some money from the Gates Foundation, he made basically a soap opera. That's what these are, these soap operas, about a love triangle in our project that was fictional. But embedded in it was this message about meat consumption and child cognitive development. And it was the most viewed video on Nollywood for a number of months. We figured that 3 million Africans actually saw this video and got this message. Now, I know there's a great deal of concern about meat consumption, and I won't get into that issue in depth, but recognize that most of these children get very little access to meat, and meat is so valuable in terms of bioavailability of micronutrients that it's important that they get some. it's better than supplementation. And it also, if you can engage this and do it through income generating activities that women benefit from, it's a win-win situation. So those are a couple of examples. There's a ton of examples of technologies, fertilizer requirements that have boosted production because of relationships with the U.S. universities. But I think as Sarah had pointed out, and as I think I did, it's evolving in different ways. I mean, another wonderful example is if you're talking about risk and how we started a project on risk management in the early 1990s, before it was a sexy topic. And we did it with pastoral people in northern Kenya, southern Ethiopia. The people who were involved in that evolved into they became part of the Michael Carter's CRISP that he runs, which was the Basis and Access Markets CRISP, Basis CRISP. And Chris Barrett at Cornell trained a fellow from Kenya, Moody, and he did his work on trying to set up an insurance scheme that was index-based, based on rainfall. Well, it turned out that he went back to Kenya. He now has created this index-based system, and it's part of the whole Kenyan policy of how to deal with pastoralists in the northern part of the country. So that's a major contribution.
I've actually seen that on the ground in Kenya. I talked to Mude about that. So
yes.
Thanks for raising that. Yeah, so we're coming close to our time. I don't want to have us drag over into the poster sessions. They're so important. So Tag, thanks a lot for your great presentation and the thought-provoking, as we said, the history and kind of the current events and looking forward and the future vision as well. Sarah, thanks for your great energy and inspiration and the Vision Prize and what we all have in our minds for this, and the call to action from both of you for what we can do as universities, so as institutions, as students, what students ought to be thinking about, with all of this. And so that's all wonderful. So thanks for your energy and your inspiration, and bravo for that. Thanks to everyone who joined us on this session. And so please stay with us. Immediately following this session, our student poster awards, and then a dynamic wrap up from the always exciting Ruben Canedo. You don't want to miss that. So please stay with us. I think we're going to be transitioning to that like right now. So again, thanks everybody. Sarah, Tag, wonderful. Thanks for being with us. All the best with everything that you're doing, and all the students out there. We need everybody. This wicked problem, this great challenge, this new Gordian knot that's hanging over us, of planetary health. How do we nourish the planet and our ever-growing population? And how do we save and preserve the planet at the same time is this great challenge going forward. So thanks for your interest in this, and onward and upward to all of us. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Roger.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tag. Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Alicia.
Bye.
Bye.